welcome back, friends. I really enjoyed that. I'm eager to hear what the rest of you think. I'm going to invite a new guest up this evening, Heather Beaty. Heather, why don't you unmute yourself and come and join us for a little chat? Have we got Heather with us?
Yeah, I'm here. I just can't start my video.
Oh.
Okay.
Well, first off, I'll say big welcome, Heather, to the space. Thanks for joining us this evening. Really appreciate the fact that you're here to share a little bit about your art with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a really big honor to be talking to such a wonderful community, and as well to be talking about Baroque music, which I'm super passionate about.
Well, let's just start with that then. Super passionate about Baroque music. Love it. Why is the question?
Why?
What about it?
Oh, there we go. I can now be in the video. So I think you guys can see me now. What is it about Baroque music? Okay, let's start with that. I have been playing classical music since I was 5 years old. I started off with the Suzuki method. And one thing about the Suzuki method is it teaches children music by ear without focusing on note reading and the technicalities of the art of music, which is, as everybody can probably surmise, it's like learning a language. It requires a lot of reading as well as listening. So the most important thing to point out, though, is I could learn by ear. And a lot of the first pieces that I learned were Baroque pieces by Johann Sebastian Bach, for example. I learned some of his minuets as a child, and they stuck with me for my whole life and into my career. And it's just been so wonderful to draw on that as my foundation. One thing about Baroque music that is just really wonderful is just how it transcends so many eras. It has catchy melodies, it's sonorous, it has like the light and the dark. And sorry, my dog is making a lot of noises. I'm sorry.
A lot of dog lovers on this particular call. I don't think you have to worry too much about that.
She's a puppy, so I have to keep my eye on her. So Baroque music has started from my beginnings, the origin of my musical education. And after completing my studies at UBC, I was able to really focus on the Baroque flute. And then after university, I didn't have the privilege of the instrument anymore because, as you saw, as you heard, it has a different sound than the modern flute. So the Baroque flute actually is made out of wood, and that kind of contributes to the different timbre, the different tone. It has a softer, more mellow tone, and it's extremely warm. And so after university, I was able to then connect with the Baroque Orchestral Mentorship Program, which drew me back in. And I just feel so lucky because I live in Vancouver. I've been able to really reap the benefits of that, as well as Jiten and all the other musicians that you heard today.
So I guess, I'm wearing my Baroque music ignorance hat because I'm just total transparent. Don't know much about it. But so the flute that you're using is made out of wood. And you said you didn't have the privilege of having the Baroque flute after you left university. So are these instruments really hard to come by? Like, I can't imagine you can walk into any, I don't know, Long and McQuaid or Tom Lee or like any music instrument store and just buy this off the shelf. So I guess my big question is, one, I think I wonder to myself, are these instruments from the time, or are they replicas of those instruments? And what's the process like of acquiring one?
Such a good question, Amy. I think it's really wonderful that you brought that up. Every Long and McQuaid caters to kind of like band programs for the beginner students, as well as like the orchestral world, which is like the symphony orchestra that the VSO is in, for example. So you have all the modern instruments, and you wouldn't be able to buy my flute, the Traverso, or the Baroque flute at Long and McQuaid or Tom Lee Music, because it's such a niche genre. It's so small, the demand. And so I ended up borrowing a flute from UBC afterwards when I started off with the Baroque Orchestral Mentorship Program. And then I decided to fork out the cash and buy my own instrument, and I ordered it from Germany, where there's a
okay.
Yeah, so the instrumentalist who I ordered the flute from, he does replicas. So none of the flutes can be played anymore that were original to the time in the Baroque period, due to the warping nature that happens to wood over time. And string instruments, like you might say, oh, string instruments are made out of wood too. Why is that an issue? Well, the difference between string instruments and woodwind instruments, as I'm sure you can surmise, is the breath,
moisture.
Right? Moisture, yeah, and everyone knows like the impact moisture has on wood. It causes it to warp and expand and crack over time. So unfortunately, we can't play on authentic instruments. We can play on replicas, but I love my instrument. It's made out of grenadilla wood, and it's a Palanca model. This is getting into kind of nerdy.
That's okay. There may be a few music nerds here. I love it.
Yeah, so it's amazing to think like, okay, wow, there's experts in this world we live in these days that can recreate the design of these instruments from that time. And it's almost as if you're going back in time when you play the instruments, because like you said, Amy, they're not common anymore. And it's such an honor and privilege to play them and hear that tone.
And I guess, honor and privilege, I wonder if it's challenging. Like, is it, if you play a modern flute, for example, can you just pick up this instrument that you have and it's like this easy transition? Because, I imagine it's not. So what's the challenge of learning a new instrument, or, the challenge, the excitement, all of those pieces?
Yeah, it's also a really good question. The difference between the modern flute and the Baroque flute is that everything is different. Okay, so when it comes to your embouchure, so the way your mouth is shaped when you blow into the instrument, to the fingerings, the way your hands are when they press on the instrument, it's so different that the Baroque flute doesn't even have keys like you would see and feel on a modern flute. The instrument has keys that you press down on with your hands. Very tactile, when you're closing and opening the notes. To create the sound. But with the Baroque flute, you're just covering holes with your fingers. So, and a lot of the time the spaces are a lot farther apart with the Baroque instrument versus the modern instrument, because over time the instrument has, from the Baroque period to the classical and then modern period, the flute underwent a lot of kind of fine tuning and development for it to be a lot more ergonomically friendly to the human hand, because then the keys were closer together so that the hands on the modern instrument could place one's hands down better. So I had to basically relearn how to play the flute when I started the Baroque instrument, and the fingerings are all separate. So it's a good ego check too, to go from being like a professional flutist to then be like, okay, I have to start from scratch. And back to what I was saying, super thankful for Early Music, the scholarship program, and the Baroque Mentorship Orchestra I was able to play with.
Awesome. I see a hand from Jiten, so I'm gonna just welcome Jiten in, because I wonder what he'd like to add to this conversation, or if the hand is an oopsie. But I
think Julia has her hand up.
Oh, you know what? I just saw the J and I assumed it was Jiten. So it is Julia. Pardon me. Julia, why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question or register your comment?
Hi, yes, thank you. So that was a wonderful presentation so far. Thanks very much. And full disclosure, I'm also a musician. So I'm going to ask you a leading question, because I think people may be interested in your answers. And forgive me, I wasn't here for the very pre-concert talk, so maybe this has been covered partly already, but I was thinking that people may be interested to know why the instruments are the way they are. That is to say, what was the setting of this music, and why the instruments make less sound? Why, you know, why are our modern instruments so much louder and brighter and brassier? And I mean, I could go on and give you the answer, but I want you to give your answer. Okay, so I hope you don't mind me asking you that question.
Thanks, Julia.
No problem at all. I'm happy to answer that, Julia. So we don't, it's hard for us to relate to a period in history that we had no connection with. But back in the Baroque era, they didn't have any sort of manufacturing abilities that we have now. They didn't have steel. They had a limited amount of technological advances in each community where the makers were. And they used natural materials. So Jiten may have elaborated on this, but the gut strings were made from sheep gut, and the violins and the cellos were made from trees, and the wood from the trees, and the flutes were also made from wood. And so everything was made from natural fibers, and as a result, the string instruments didn't have the tension on their strings that we now have the ability to do with our modern instruments, with our steel strings versus the gut strings, which if you tension them too much, they just snap. And with the flutes, they didn't have the ability to work with metal the way we can now, and it just wasn't in their technology. So to your point, Julia, about tone and volume, with the natural materials comes a subtler, softer, gentler sound, which when paired with the appropriate instrumentation and repertoire works really well, as you just heard in the Janitsch that we played and the Corelli, right? It just all works in that context. So, and also when you pair the sound with the space, that also works really well. So the Chan Center, my goodness, that
an acoustical, like brilliant space, right?
Such an acoustically brilliant space to play in, and we can't expect that that's what it was like back in the Baroque period, but we do know that they were playing in resonant halls and larger spaces like churches and stone rooms. So the acoustics helped amplify the sound.
And may I just jump in? And I mean, the audiences were more of the courtly variety as well, right? As a rule, so that they weren't playing to huge audiences of people from every class, but more likely were playing in smaller rooms for smaller groups.
So there wasn't a need then to have the sound sort of reach to the back of the room like there is in a modern auditorium.
Yeah, definitely. It was either in a salon setting, so really intimate and close, or in a larger setting like in a church, which would cater for like a more formal event. And yes, Julia, definitely commissioned for either a court or a royal patron, that sort of thing.
Right. And I guess I've always found it really interesting that as the Industrial Revolution took place and the technologies to make the instruments, you know, brighter and louder and everything, as that developed, so then the audiences got bigger and expanded into the middle class, you know, that was sort of beginning to grow at the time. So I've just always found it really interesting, the social context of the way instruments have developed.
Thank you for that context, Julie. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's a really great point. And I think like at the end of the day, music's always fun, and it starts off as like something that can reach people. And especially when it comes to Baroque music, back to your sociological kind of perspective on this, a lot of the time the music was written for courtly purposes, for like royals to then study it and learn it as a hobby, and they would commission it for them to kind of like, it was for them to pursue like there was a few flutists who were huge patrons for flute music and flute composers, and it was just for them. But then anyways, a lot of, yeah, I don't need to go into that in a lot of detail, but we can think that aspect of it, the way that it's focused on like education and enjoyment as a hobby.
As we talk about, we keep referencing the Baroque period, and we talk about being in a courtly, space. Tell us what the dates are. What are the actual dates in history that the Baroque period encompasses?
I believe it's 1500 to 16. No, that couldn't be right. You put me on the spot a little bit here.
Oh no.
I think it's 1600 to 1750.
I feel like when I heard this ensemble, that it reminds me of certain like period movies, for example, where you hear this in the background and it gives you this imagination of like corseted dresses and velvets and heavy fabrics and that kind of, capes and those kinds of things. So I heard you Googling.
Yeah, it's just so I can verify what I said. I think it is 1600 to 1750. That's kind of like the broad scope.
Okay.
Back in the Baroque period itself, it was all a lot more loose, right? Like they didn't say, okay, it's 1750, we're now in the classical era. It was a lot more transient, and it depended on where you were in Europe too. The style of music really changed. So depending on whether you were in Italy or Germany or France, or all over these little pockets of cultural development, it changes. So it's really interesting too to look at the history from that perspective geographically.
And so these two composers of these pieces, so if I'm pronouncing them right, Corelli, which I think Jiten said was an Italian composer, sounds Italian, and Janitsch, is that German?
Yeah, yes.
So, okay, so we've got two different composers, and what sort of would have been, my ear's not in tune enough to recognize maybe what the big differences might have been between those two parts of Europe during the Baroque period. And I wonder if there's something there that you can unpack for us around who these composers were and the types of music they composed.
Sure. So Corelli, as an Italian, he used a different style of ornamentation. Now, I don't think that word is familiar to everybody here. And to be clear, ornamentation, it's we all know what it means, like beyond music, but in the case of music, it means like the trills and the mordents and the turns and the elaborations on the melodic line. Now, the Italian style of ornamentation is very different than the German style. And when we're studying Baroque music, part of our education is understanding the performance practice and the way that musicians should interpret the music. Now, in Italian violin music, I think a lot of the time the violinist is expected to write in their own ornamentations and kind of create their own line. Whereas in German music, it's very kind of clear, like this is what this means and that is what that means. And I think you can kind of see the cultural connotation and similarity there as well, right? Now, I think every composer as well is different, so they might write their own markings, like Bach versus Janitsch. So it's always a fun kind of learning opportunity to really delve into.
Let's talk a little bit about, and I love all of this sort of, I mean, like it's, for me, it's learning a new language too. There's a lot of new words here that I'm not familiar with, but I love the opportunity to explore and to play and to learn. What about you particularly, Heather, in terms of what you're doing now? Because a little birdie told me that I should ask you about something called Concerts on Tap. So maybe you want to tell us a little bit about what that is.
It's so nice that the little birdie said that. Yeah, I mean, like beyond my performing career as a flutist in Vancouver, I'm super passionate about building the art scene here in Vancouver and making it fun and connecting the dot between my passion for classical music, which I just love. Like it's my second voice beyond what I'm doing right now. Like I love playing music, and I just think that like so often people feel intimidated about classical music. Kind of, Amy, what you were saying when you led in the conversation, like you were like a little nervous to ask, like, oh, I don't know if I feel safe in this dialogue, because it's just, there's so many unknowns. But I want to say it's open for everybody. You just need to listen. You just need to be present and take it in. And you don't need to know anything. You just need to let it wash over you.
Mhm.
And then maybe that will pique your interest into learning more, listening more. It's like any other music, right? So with Concerts on Tap, my partner Molly McKinnon and I have decided to create a little concert series in Vancouver and a few of our fun craft beer spaces that we have all over East Van and the city in general now. It's just growing. It's amazing. And what we did is we started a little concert series in the tasting room. So we've done a few, and the first of which was one called Strange Music, and it was in Strange Fellows Brewing. I don't know if any of you guys go there. It's on Clark Drive. And Strange Fellows Brewing hosted our event, and it was a huge success. And we presented a little program of Baroque music, and I was able to play my flute there. And we paired 4 pieces with a flight of beer. And so the audience could then order beer and enjoy and relax and not feel like they had to sit quietly. And people did, though, which is amazing because it's still so wonderful to like respect the music and just be present and listen. Now that happened organically. We didn't say like you must listen, but
And not something you expect necessarily when you're in a brew house.
no, not at all. But it goes to show classical music is not limited to the concert hall, and it shouldn't be, especially as we kind of go into decades ahead and try to support the longevity of this genre, which has stood the test of time. But how can we continue to adapt?
How do you pair Baroque music with beer? What is that process?
I know
The sound of this, instrument or this piece tastes like this beer. I'm curious.
I know, it was so much fun. It was a challenge. I mean, like what we did as the concert organizers, Molly and myself, we chose 4 kind of contrasting pieces, one of which was a solo flute fantasia by Telemann, a German composer. Another was a Bach trio sonata. Another was another kind of like Austrian composer who wrote more of like a fun piece, and like a duo. So with all these different pieces, we just said, and with the modern day, we were able to send the tracks to the brewers and they could listen to them. So we found Spotify tracks for these pieces and sent them to the brewers, and they were able to collaborate with us, which is what we wanted, right? Like that's so much more interesting in terms of community building, to work with people who are the experts in their field in the brewery. And they said, okay, this beer would be great for that. And they were able to give us their advice. And so then it was a lot more of a partnership, and we hope they had fun with it.
Very, very cool stuff, Heather. Really appreciate you sharing all that with us. Our little Q&A for this segment has flown by, but you are going to join us again after the second little video that we play. And so I'm going to just welcome Jiten back into the space now, officially, after falsely welcoming into the space last time. But he's going to introduce this piece for us. And then we're going to go on another little Baroque ride. So Jiten, what are we about to listen to?
So this is a piece by Johann Bernhard Bach, who is the second cousin of the J.S. Bach that most of us are familiar with. There were a lot of Bachs back then, and they all played music apparently. So this is a piece for string ensemble. So there's going to be a lot more people on stage. We've got 8 string players, 4 violins, 2 violas, 2 viola da gambas, 2 harpsichords. One of the harpsichord players is also going to be conducting. And this has 6 movements. Most of them are dances, which is really characteristic of Baroque music. And one thing you will hear throughout is that it features the solo violin. So it'll alternate between all of the violins playing, or all of the strings playing together, and then one section from each movement where you just hear a single violin. Normally that would be the concertmaster, the violinist that sits in the first chair. But because this is sort of a learning space, we traded off all of the solos.
Interesting. Okay. I feel like there's going to be a lot for us to unpack in the second Q&A. And then of course we'll invite anybody who has questions to join in as well. So with that being said, thank you, Heather. Thank you, Jiten. We'll see you after this musical interlude. And Rick, when you're ready to hit play, please go ahead and do so.